goodness, the word fall. Well, it has multiple meanings. The primary meaning is, of course, associated with gravity. Things fall, if not held or suspended. Then there are figurative meanings like fall from grace. Falling meaning losing one's position or losing one's standing and descending into lower status, etc. And then there are even further implications like a fallen woman. Then fall meaning autumn, and I suppose that refers to the falling leaves. As you know, linguistics is only one aspect of anthropology. I mean, anthropology is a vast field, but it's a very interesting part. Part of my interest in language is coming from the fact that I myself am a bilingual, bicultural person. Semantic differential. It's a very radical thought that no language can ever be translated into any other language. A door, for example, is not exactly the same thing as porte in French or kapı in Turkish. In some cultures, a door is a symbol of an entrance into something, such as when you say, the door to my heart. But in their other cultures, maybe the door symbolizes an exit instead of an entrance. So when you say, you're the door to my heart, that means pack your things and get lost. You're leaving. But then when we're dealing with a totally abstract concept like individualism, in some cultures, individualist can have a slightly negative meaning because it's associated with selfishness. Whereas in other cultures, it's a good thing to be an individual because the individual tries to distinguish himself or herself from all others because we are all craving to be unique. Well, are we really? I mean, there are cultures where people are craving to be exactly the same as everyone else. We frown upon that. We call that conformism or whatever. Who's to judge? How far has our individualism taken us? Let's look at it that way. It might even produce interpersonal distantiation. If I'm too much of an individualist, and so are you, how are we ever going to get close to each other? My father was stationed to France. It was 1945. So at that time, my parents were also trying to teach me Turkish. I would do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but increasingly more French than the Turkish because I was a great conformist. Everybody is speaking French. Why do you two strange people speak a different language? I wanted to be like all my other friends. But I also had the seeds of Turkish as well, and then subsequently going back to the native country, I instantly ceased talking in French. They couldn't make me speak French anymore because I was terribly afraid that if I speak a different language, all the other children would make fun of me. I lost that language, and then English kicked in, and so all these languages made me aware of the differences among them. And you find a lot of this in anthropology, so it was fascinating. There's a lot of talk about music as the universal language and stuff. But it's not altogether. There are forms of music that would bore you to death, but it would be the music of some tribe somewhere. And then there are other forms of music that seem to be quite cross-national, cross-cultural. As Homo sapiens, we have certain traits that we share with everybody, all cultures, all nations. There are some traits that we share with only some cultures and some nations, and then there are certain traits that we don't share with anyone except ourselves. This being the case, that applies directly to music. But the international or cross-cultural dimension of music is formidable, so that's why people think it's the universal language, a bit of an exaggeration. We can communicate incredible subtleties and abstractions and all kinds of things which without the language we could not communicate. But then of course we're all aware of other modes of communication like facial expressions, body language, intonation in the language, all of these nuances and so on. Another thing that intrigues me about language is it's a kind of a philosophical issue of solipsism. We agree that an object is red, and we can determine, not subjectively but objectively, that it is what we call red by measuring its frequency of light. It corresponds to the red part of the spectrum. But I will never know what you see here as red. And vice versa, you will never know what I see. Our only understanding comes from the fact that whatever it is that we see, we've agreed on calling it red. So that means there is no ultimate communication between individuals. We are cut off at some level. Now, maybe in a totally futuristic science fiction type of future, we can interface our minds directly so as that I can feel your feelings and hear your thoughts, vice versa. Then maybe I'll say, oh, wow, that's what Thomas sees when he looks at red. Wow, that's a bit different than mine, isn't it? I characterize the 50s as a kind of a boring era. I mean, the only interesting thing was rock and roll, and it caused a huge scandal. You listen to those rock and roll songs today and you see nothing scandalous about them compared to what we have today. And the very fact that even those caused such a huge scandal shows me how repressive the society was at that time. Still colonialism, actual colonialism, and also colonialism of the minds, conventional male-female roles, everything was prevailing. In this country it was the Eisenhower era, basically. Cars for teenagers and drive-ins and drinking, different movements like the beatniks. Nobody would want their children to become a beatnik, you know. It all suddenly, I think, began in the 60s because a number of forces came together. The Vietnam War, the civil rights movement was a whole decade of ferment of ideas. The flower children, concepts like consciousness raising, altered states of mind, free sex. Even the sexual experience was, in my opinion, much more intense in the 60s because coming out of repression into liberation is a much more passionate and exciting area than many years later it's all become commonplace. And that was also my formative decade. I was much younger then. Everything was more passionate. Transition from oppression to liberation is a much more exciting period than transition from liberation into greater liberation, say. It's more of the same. It's a qualitative change versus quantitative. 80s and 90s, and perhaps a little bit of the 21st century, the youth were not so exciting anymore. Their parents were more interesting, because they were the youth of the earlier interesting period. There was a slogan in the 60s. I think one of the cultural leaders of the period, Jerry Rubin, had come up with this thing: don't trust anybody over 30. The idea was that once you reach approximately the age of 30, then powers of conservatism and conventionalism and conformity, things like the need to pay the bills on time and the mortgage and the car and the kids and this and that, will weigh on you so much that your consciousness will change and you'll become exactly like your parents. So don't trust anybody over 30. Well, that slogan was modified in the 90s, where I would say, don't trust anybody under 30, because there was a great deal of triviality. Part of the reason I stopped teaching was because I began to think of myself as not a good teacher anymore. The learning experience involves a great deal of reinventing the wheel. It's great for the inventor. You say, but then over the years I'm losing patience with people's discoveries. There were other factors too. A great number of students, perhaps the majority, they would rather get an MBA than study intellectual field. Values have changed. There is a kind of a neoconservatism of the youth, which I had been noticing in the immediate past 2 decades perhaps, but that is changing also. The youth is changing back into a more progressive or even radical directions, as they did in the 60s. So when I look at the whole picture, we're entering a new era, a period of nuclear holocaust. According to some, the possibility of a nuclear confrontation now is even greater than it was during the Cold War. But interestingly, people don't seem to care much about it. Whereas during the Cold War, people were terrified. Now nobody cares. It's like we have immunity against radioactive fallout. Oh, we say, well, nothing will happen. Or maybe if we don't think about it, it will go away. It's a period of escapism. Escapism through consumerism, through hedonistic escapes, fascination with what they call technologies, the internet, social media. There's been a tremendous quantitative proliferation of things, complexities. Our world has become much more extensive, but far less intensive. People know a great deal more nowadays, many things, but less and less about each of the things that they know. Quantity has overtaken quality. Take photographs. Until the advent of these electronic devices and stuff, people used to have conventional cameras, and then we would all be excited, like, when are we going to see that? Oh, as soon as the roll is finished, I'll have it develop and then I'll send you some. Well, that would be a whole month. But now, everybody has got this little handheld gadget that they keep in their pockets, with which they can take 1,000 photographs every day, and they can send it to 1,000 people. Our appreciation of a photo has diminished as a result of that. We used to look at a black and white picture and say, wow, I remember that. Now there are a million pictures. I delete most of them automatically because there's too many of them. Same thing with everything. Everybody has become a writer since word processors have. With the social media and the internet, everybody is constantly publishing. Everybody has suddenly become an artist. It's almost like an economic principle, you know, scarcity determines value. When the quantity increases like that, abundance of something decreases its appreciation. Good foods, to sex, to what you have to read, the movies, my God. I remember when I was in high school, I used to run away from school and go to see movies in movie theaters. So, you know, I would approximate about 2 a week. Those movies would leave a tremendous impact on me. Each one I could tell you who the actors were, who the director was. Now, whenever I feel like, man, you know, I should watch a movie tonight, I can't choose one that I like because there are so many of them. We become awfully jaded. The sheer quantitative availability of things have depreciated the value of most things. Photographs from the turn of the century, early parts of the 20th century until the middle of it, when you look at group pictures of people, you don't find a single person who is smiling. You know, when you take a picture, you just stand there and have your picture taken. Now, it's compulsory to have all 32 teeth showing. You've got to grin like an alligator with an open mouth. You know, everything in there must show. And it's your teeth must also be white. We have a multi-million-dollar industry to whiten your teeth because you're forced to show them all the time. You're supposed to smile. Do you see any politician who doesn't smile? Never. Negativity is underrated. First of all, let's look at the word negative. It's negative. It's a fact that many discoveries and inventions that have brought about progress has been as a result of negating something that used to exist previously. And then secondly, if you didn't have negativity, you wouldn't have positivity. Without negativity, you have nothing. Negativity is the force of change, not positivity. Positivity is good for feel good, you know, and also it encourages you and it stops you from being depressed sometimes, and so it has good aspects too. So as usual, you have to have both. America is like the trendsetter for cultural change. All the good things and bad things. And when we say America, what about America? I think it's the mode of production that determines the nature of the culture. We got to sell things. We got to make profit. And we have this ideology that if we make profit, that's the only way to be free. Well, maybe it is, but how you make the profit and at whose expense? In this country, it's very common to say, let me buy you a drink. That's something that you wouldn't say in many cultures because it's considered crass and vulgar to say, let me buy you a drink. What are you, a beggar? Like, can't you buy your own? You would say, let's have a drink. You could go as far as saying, it's on me, or my treat. Buying, it's the basis of our culture and our freedom. Buying and selling. It's a market economy. It's not only an economy, it's a market culture. Many aspects of things are for sale and purchase. Other than that, there's kind of a ledger book approach to relationships. For example, you do me a favor, I owe you one, and I will remind you of that. You owe me one. Favors, if they're done for a purpose, like expectation of a favor in return, then indeed it's a mercantile activity. But if a favor is done as a spontaneous, generous action of one's own will, to do a friend a favor without expecting anything in return, then why is it that that friend should owe you something in the future? Even the word property is related to the word proper. It's proper to have property. And what do you think of real estate? As opposed to what? Unreal estate? I have unreal estate in Mars. It seems like almost historically determined that once you have irrigated agriculture, inevitably you will have sedentary populations, because now you're producing more than you can eat. So that means you've got to protect that. So you need to have walls. All the other hunting and gathering people will be interested in what you're doing. They're breaking their backs looking for food. Meanwhile, you're sitting there philosophizing and eating the bread. So people start coming into these areas. So urbanization is inevitable. So these are all unilinearist type of arguments, that what we have is inevitable. And with irrigation, we will eventually have cities. With cities, you will have a division of labor, and you will have the merchants, craftsmen, the clergy, and the us and them distinctions will be pronounced, because whenever their harvest isn't good, they're pillaging us, they're attacking us. We do the same. So we have to distinguish ourselves from them, which means we are good and they're bad, always. And eventually this will grow into kingdoms, when one city will begin conquering other cities and kingdoms. And then we are truly messed up. We go into feudalism in Europe. There was the hegemony of the clergy. Popes were the ultimate emperors. And no king would alienate the Pope, because that would be asking for trouble, But then, of course, the power of the church diminished. We have 1,000 years of that. That's all agricultural. But then when industry begins, industry does not support feudalism. Once you have industry, new ideas will start coming up. Nation states, and so on. So all of these things indicate that it wasn't a matter of where we simply took the wrong turn. No, we took the only inevitable turn. And so this is historical determinism, in a way. And it's a powerful theoretical position, but it shouldn't become too rigid. So multilinear evolution is also a possibility. If simply the geography of the Earth had been a little different, that there was no continent of America. It was one big ocean, and then only Eurasia and Africa and Australia existed. Well, maybe we wouldn't have today's version of capitalism, because without colonialism there would be no Europe, no European power. There would be no European culture that impresses the world. And resources, where would they come from? There would be no place for Europe to discharge its extra populations in order to prevent catastrophes and revolutions. More Italians have emigrated from Italy than the population of Italy. If that possibility did not exist geographically, by a freak of nature. I mean, we know that continents drift, right? What if they had drifted in some different direction and there was no North America or South America? So would we? No, then we would have a different kind of linear evolution. But it would still be linear, whichever kind it was. We're living at a very interesting era that we're beginning to ask that question. Do we have an end? Is there an end? Because maybe 50 years ago, we didn't see any end. It would just go on forever. Just like the whole world itself was this vast and limitless garbage can. You could pollute the seas, throw your garbage out anywhere, dump your stuff. It's big enough that it would, But now, some people are very pessimistic about it, and I'm somewhat pessimistic about it. I have not completely outruled the possibility of the sixth extinction, as they refer to. And now they're talking about going to Mars and polluting other places, skipping from planet to planet to deposit our garbage. First we dig their earth and rip off their goodies, and then we dump our toxic wastes and our garbage over there. And in all this time we are seeking positivity and happiness. Is it sarcasm or I don't know?
I guess that's good for today. What do you think?
It's fine. It is an endless trip anyway.